Good day. Welcome to the Corey Morgan Show. As you can see, it's still Cowboy Cosplay Week, and I'm taking full advantage of it to try and wear denim as long as I can. Hey, I'm convincing, right? I look like I came right off the range. Maybe not. But hey, I live rural. I raise bees. It's kind of a livestock, isn't it? I'll use that as my excuse. Anyways, good to see you guys checking in on the live end of things. A whole bunch of J's. Hey, we got James, Jake, Jet, and Jordan all in there in the comment scroll. Use that scroll. Have discussion, send questions my way. I appreciate it. I see them all, even if I don't necessarily read them all out loud. I got a good show going today. Got Adam Zivo back after I so rudely greeted him with some poor technical issues last time. So the conversation is still valid. We're going to talk. He's a columnist at the National Post and a few other areas about safe supply. He's really been having it out with the activists on that whole issue. It's going to be a great conversation. And of course, we'll have our news check-ins and things going as well. But let me get ranting on one of my favorite people, my favorite subjects out there right now, and that is Nenshi. Yes, our NDP leader in Alberta. Now, usually a top priority for a new political party leader is to get a seat in the legislature or parliament, depending on their level of government. But Alberta NDP leader Nenshi has been pretending that he isn't in a hurry to seek a seat in the Alberta legislature. But that's anything but true. I mean, having ridden into the NDP leadership with a very impressive level of party support, people anticipated Nenshi's political ascendancy would progress quickly. Instead, though, it's stalled. I mean, the first comprehensive poll held in Alberta since he won the leadership has found that support for the NDP has been flatlined, and they're trailing Danielle Smith's UCP by 14 points. Typically, a new party leader can expect a honeymoon with the electors and maybe even a bump in support, but this hasn't happened with Nenshi. And he's proven himself to be a formidable organizer in the leadership race, but he just hasn't endeared himself to the electorate at large. Nenshi's working hard right now on the pancake circuit while the legacy media dutifully carries water for him with breathless coverage on how well attended Nehed's events have been, but the public at large really hasn't taken notice of him. And when the summer ends and the public events dry up, Nenshi's going to be challenged by his lack of a seat more than ever. The legislative session is going to begin this fall in Alberta, and some unknown backbench MLA named Christina Gray will serve as the leader of the opposition, while Nenshi remains on the outside looking in. Many Albertans don't know who Nenshi really is. If a person isn't an avid CBC viewer or didn't live in Calgary during his reign as mayor, they really aren't too familiar with the guy, actually. And it's going to take more than flipping some pancakes at rodeos to get people to know him. The legislature is the natural place to establish himself as an opposition leader and potential future premier. It's where Nenshi can hold the premier's feet to the fire on policies and where he can promote NDP motions. It would keep him in the news scroll and establish him in the minds of Albertans as a possible premier in waiting. But alas, for now, the best Nenshi can do is hang around the legislature atrium after sessions and hope that a reporter wants to speak with him. With media outlets getting smaller, few, aside from the Western Standard, of course, have the resources to keep a reporter on site in the legislature full-time. Those other outlets garner their information from debates on bills and get video clips from the legislative session. They don't sit in groups to scrum party leaders in the lobby as they used to. Nenshi's a canny political player. He knows he's at a terrible disadvantage as a leader without a seat, but for now, there's not a bloody thing he can do about it. It's beautiful. Normally, somebody within a party would be willing to step aside from a safe seat for a new leader. Clearly, right now, nobody within the NDP caucus is willing to do that for Nenshi. And part of the problem is that Nenshi can't offer great incentives for an MLA to fall on their sword and give them their seat. A party in power can offer all sorts of appointments to ensure an MLA taking one for the team has a soft landing. A party in opposition is kind of limited when it comes to such political horse trading. The safest seats for the NDP are in Edmonton. There may be an MLA or two up there willing to step aside to make room for Nenshi, but it wouldn't be ideal for them. If the NDP can't make gains in Calgary, they don't have a chance of winning the next election. They want to keep Nenshi in Calgary where they hope to build a more solid base of support. And in Calgary, there are a few seats that would be considered safe, but the MLAs sitting in them aren't going to move over for Nenshi. This indicates Nenshi isn't as popular within the party ranks as some people might think. I mean, sure, he won the leadership with an astounding level of support, but to get a seat, he needs some love coming from the old NDP stalwarts, and it doesn't appear to be there. While Lethbridge West is open and will be holding a by-election soon, it's far from a safe seat for Nenshi. He could possibly run and lose down there, but that would cause some pretty deep embarrassment. He's better off to bide his time than take such a risk. It's still going to be more than 3 years till the next general election, and Nenshi's surely going to find his way into the legislature before then. But he isn't riding the wave of popularity that the legacy media implies, though, and he needs every advantage he can get. With every month, he sits forlornly outside the legislature begging for attention, while another MLA serves as opposition leader. Nenshi's just going to look weaker and weaker. Being seatless right now is an inconvenience for Nenshi, but the quest for a seat's going to turn into one into desperation pretty soon if he doesn't get a chance to pursue it soon. So Sit back and watch. Let's see if he can buy the love of another NDP member soon. All right, that's enough out of me. Oh, by the way, just a hat tip to the folks at the barbecue I was at last night for the Banff Kananaskis constituency. That's where I live. And it was amazing. There had to be at least a dozen MLAs and a couple of MPs there. Unfortunately, we're a rural seat, but we do have an NDP member. And as we can see, though, the party is trying very hard to change that around. Banff and Canmore are the hardest parts to do it. Met some great folks from Banff and a few others there. So we'll see what happens. All right, let's turn to see what else is going on in the news. We got Jen Hodgson in the studio today as Dave couldn't make it. That's fine. And yes, you've been hard at it. What are the top stories dominating the Western Standard site these days, Jen?
Hey, Corey. So hard at it, but not too hard at it since it's the opening days of the Stampede. So
where's your cowboy hat?
I left it in the newsroom. I should have dashed out at the last minute.
Calgary blasphemy.
I'll be putting it on later when I head out and go down to the grounds.
Okay.
So today we have Trudeau. He's visiting with NATO. He was speaking at an event at the Canadian Embassy during the NATO summit this week. And he was talking about climate change and how that is actually Canada's most, quote, existential threat, and not just because of the environment, but also the security issues that are around that. But speaking of security issues and NATO, Trudeau simultaneously is raked through the coals at NATO by US senators, UK media for failing to meet the 2% pledge that as a NATO member country, Canada is expected to meet this requirement of having 2% of the GDP. So there's a lot of scrutiny internationally, unfortunately, faced at Canada because we have failed to meet up to that. And Trudeau is still trumpeting how well our defense spending is going, while Defense Minister Bill Blair, he actually inflated the numbers for the defense spending.
Yeah, they can promise all they like. They've actually got to cut a check at some point. And he's not willing to do that. I mean, he's not afraid to spend money on things he likes. When he's dragging his heels on this, his little pointy heels, he honestly just doesn't want to invest in defense.
Well, you would think as defense minister, that would be something he likes.
Yeah. Well, his boss is stuck on woke issues.
That's right. Well, and so speaking of problematic Liberal MPs, we have another Liberal MP who is being investigated for conflict of interest. We have the Ethics Committee calling a special meeting next week, even though Parliament is on summer session, to investigate Liberal MP Randy Boissonnault. Boissonnault is a major shareholder in a medical supplier that was contracted by the federal government during the pandemic era. And some partners, the business partners, were discussing Randy in text messages, although Boissonnault denies that it was actually him and says, well, it must be some other Randy.
Well, there's so many Randys.
So many Randys, yeah.
I'm sure his company has at least 20 Randys within it.
Oh, that's right, especially a company of maybe about 20 people in itself, all named Randy. And so going on as well to the spy scandal, so that we saw recently on Parliament Hill last month, that conveniently when summer session went on break, the subject wasn't as animatedly discussed. However, the Quebec RCMP is very interested to find out more about the Chinese foreign interference. And they put out a release yesterday saying that they're looking for the public's help to really narrow down where is this Chinese interference coming from. So anyone who's being harassed or threatened by Chinese agents, they're asked to report it to the police. And also law enforcement in Montreal and Longueuil are hosting open forum meetings next week, or actually it might even be this week, coming up already, to inform the public more about the threat of China on Canada. So at least the Quebec RCMP is at least talking about it. We haven't seen as much from our politicians.
That's what it's down to, the Quebec RCMP. Well, at least somebody's paying attention to
Yeah, that's right. At least someone. I was thinking the same thing. And a couple other things. So there's been a global privacy sweep of various apps and websites. Alberta Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner was in on that sweep. And it actually found many deceptive patterns in the way that websites and apps try to get people to put in their personal information. So they'll complicate the process for accessing privacy policies. They'll delete accounts, logging out, and you'll have to add more personal information to restore your account. So some problems with that. And finally, Corey, our Alberta power supply. We're looking at another threat this week. It's been a hot week here in Calgary for the stampede. And so now there's some warnings out from the government to lower your use of energy. And this comes right on the heels, of course, as we all know, of the water crisis that we faced in recent weeks and the warning of rolling blackouts this past January.
It says a lot. We're the richest province in the country in many, many ways, but yet we're suffering these shortcomings.
That's right.
And Stephen Guilbeault was trumpeting, look at that, Alberta has stopped coal use, early. Yeah, and now we have blackouts, you pinhead.
Yes, that's a great example, doesn't it? What not to do.
Yeah, I mean, hey, we want to ease off things, but it's just never enough for the climate obsessed. Oh, well. Interesting times. People in Calgary are getting pretty grouchy. You can't have your air conditioning, can't have your water, can't flush your toilet more than once. Well, I think they've improved that now.
Finally.
You can send the brown down. That's nice. But boy, what a summer. All right,
a summer.
Thanks for the updates. I'll let you go find your cowboy hat and carry on with the coverage. Thanks,
Thank you,
Jen.
Corey.
All right. So that was Jen Hodgson. Yes, you see those very prolific stories from Jen all over the site there. Jonathan Bradley and others, of course, are always putting lots out there. And Sean will be checking in with him in a little while. The reason we can do that, guys, the reason we can afford to is because you've been subscribing. We're subscriber-based, not subsidy-based. So we don't ask for tax dollars. And, the government's not really in a rush to offer them to us. But all the same, that makes us accountable to you. So if you haven't subscribed yet, come on, guys, get on there. westernstandard.news/subscription. Take one out, $9.99 a month, $100 a year, just like when you used to get the newspaper to your door. Then you can get past that pesky paywall and get to all those stories and coverages going on out there. So if you subscribed already, thank you very much. We really do appreciate it. It keeps us independent and it keeps us rolling on these things. And again, if you haven't subscribed yet, I'm going to keep nagging you because that's how we pay those bills. All right. Yeah, I don't know. It's just dark comedy watching Justin Trudeau with his behavior in NATO. He knows. I mean, he has to know. They've been upset with him for years. And I said in a recent piece I wrote, I mean, this was prior to Justin Trudeau even. Canada's been neglecting to pay its fair share into defense spending for years, for multiple governments. And we're not talking about sending more money overseas to other nations. We're just talking about spending that much on our domestic defense so as to be a properly contributing member of NATO. And I know some people get upset with things and everything. I'm not going to go into that whole debate. But I tell you what, NATO is important. Russia is on an expansionist trip right now. And the best defense is to have a strong number of allies properly invested with decent defensive capabilities to at least stand as a deterrent. But right now, Canada is at like 1.3% of GDP. And what does Trudeau do? He gets up there and gives them a lecture on climate change. They don't care. I don't think anybody in Ukraine really cares about what the temperature is tomorrow. They're worried about getting blown into obliteration. But no, Trudeau lectures him. And that tone, if you really want to torture yourself, listen to his presentation. That wasn't what they wanted to hear. And he's getting pilloried by the UK, by the Americans. Even Cocaine Mitch put a tweet out saying Justin Trudeau and Canada, their northern neighbors, need to step up and spend what they're obligated to if they want to take part in NATO. Jordan is saying NATO's done for, whatever. The bottom line is, I know there's a lot of debate on that. There's some people who kookily think that Putin's not a lunatic. But all the same, even if we want out of NATO, fine, but we still should be keeping our defensive forces properly funded and modern and so forth. All right, well, let's get on to our guest, on to something different where we've really been making a nice mess nationally too, and that's with Safer Supply. I've got Adam Zivo back. I've been looking forward to it. Thank you very much for joining us again today, Adam. I'm certain we'll be able to hear each other this time, right?
Yeah, I can hear you just well. Thanks for having me back on the show.
So, I've been watching with interest on social media. Boy, you cover a lot of things, and it's fantastic out there. But the one I do want to discuss has been the Safer Supply. Almost, I say it as a cult-like advocacy. I mean, the people who were pushing for this, just the advocates are getting so extreme. I mean, to the point of looking to sabotage conferences, coming after you, and just a refusal to look at the consequences of these policies. What's going on out there, Adam?
Well, I mean, it's a long story, but what I have to say is that addiction policymaking in Canada is dominated by a clique of activists and activist-minded researchers who, for 20 years, have been championing this radical harm reduction ideology that has helped, facilitated countless deaths because we're really not solving this addiction crisis. They claim to be evidence-based. They're often not. Their definition of evidence is quite questionable. For example, many of the studies that they have, which support safer supply, amount to just interviews with drug users who are on this program. And then the answers given to those interviews are framed as objective proof that it's working. So imagine, for example, you go up to a drug user who is receiving free opioids and we say, oh, do you like this program? Is it benefiting you? Are you selling the drugs? And the guy says, oh yeah, it's great. It's wonderful. Of course I would never sell the drugs. And if I do, it's only out of compassion. There's no downsides. And the researchers say, oh yeah, you know what? We're going to believe him. And we need to expand safer supply because this is evidence that this is true. And this is evidence-based policymaking.
And it's just absurd. I mean, if it worked, if we could see results, if we could see people's lives really being saved, if we could see a decline in overdoses, a reduction in addiction, I'd support it too. But we're just not seeing it.
We're really not. And here's the thing, is that the largest study ever conducted on safer supply was published in January, and it was published in the British Medical Journal, and it claimed that safer supply led to a 55 to 91% reduction in overdose deaths. But I reviewed the evidence and the underlying data with a team of 6 physicians, all who have a background in addiction medicine, all of who are distinguished. And we realized that the researchers actually fudged their interpretation of this data. And that when you actually fully filtered out confounding effects and measured long-term outcomes, safer supply had no statistically significant impact on death. So essentially, these researchers found this robust data that showed that safer supply didn't work. And then they misrepresented the data to imply that it did. And I think that that's deeply unethical.
Absolutely. But what I don't understand, as I said, is the almost religious-like hang-up advocates have with it, to the point of, again, I was just shocked when you wrote that piece about they were looking to even dye the water in a fountain red or do things like, where are these people coming from? Why are they so fixated on this? I mean, I understand compassion and concern, then why aren't they looking at evidence-based instead of this strange obsession with this?
Well, I mean, there's different groups here, right? So I feel the most compassion for the grassroots organizers who are dealing with addiction every single day and who are watching their friends and associates die. That's really traumatizing. We've seen such a rise in death over the past 10 years that it's understandable that these activists are desperate in a way, and they are searching for anything which could potentially save their friends' lives. But when you're in that kind of mind space, sometimes you're willing to make compromises, and you are willing to believe, to really delude yourself into thinking that something like safer supply is an effective intervention when in reality it's not. I think also there's a lack of understanding of the weakness of the evidence-based and safer supply. Many safer supply advocates think that these studies are legitimate, but once again, when you break them down, you find that oftentimes they have really weak methodologies or really strange interpretations of data.
Yeah, and some of the stuff we can see is anecdotal, but people getting out and being, on the streets, paradoxically, one of the commenters saying, and yeah, in Calgary's Beltline, I mean, it's just horrific. It's dystopian. And we know that Vancouver, of course, has really been the epicenter of it. But, the failure, unfortunately, of current policies, I don't think anybody's really found a solution yet, but we just know there's a tragic, horrific problem of addiction going on out there. But some of it's been exposed. I mean, there was a recent piece, I'm forgetting which one it was now. It was, I think, from the UK, but I mean, it was some photojournalism and some fantastic work just to bring it home for people who perhaps don't get out of the suburbs or don't get out of rural areas, just to see how awful and terrible this addiction epidemic is. I mean, how it's eating people alive out there.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is that we have to all recognize the fact that this is a real crisis that is taking thousands of lives every single year. Overdoses now, drug-related deaths are like the leading cause of death for youth in BC. And our governments are saying that they're taking this seriously, but they're not. We don't have significant investment into treatment capacity in BC, for example. It takes a very long time to get into detox. It takes a very long time to get into a rehab center. Same thing in Ontario. In Alberta, it's much better because Daniel Smith has been investing heavily into treatment services, but it's still not where it needs to be. So we constantly talk about, this illicit drug crisis and all of these overdoses, but it's really rhetoric. There's no real action here. And even these big interventions like, safe supply, people say it's the compassionate thing. Unfortunately, it is actually just the lazy solution. It is the cheap solution, because getting people better, giving them the comprehensive supports, the housing supports, the employment supports, the counseling needed for them to reclaim their lives is expensive and complicated. It's much easier and much cheaper just to give people a bottle of pills every day so they can go kill themselves slowly.
Yeah, and then not only is it not effective in getting people, off of their addictions that are slowly killing them, when we get diversion of these, the risk now, and there's evidence starting to show that it's actually causing harm. It's creating new addicts, which is even more devastating. I mean, it's bad enough to have a policy that's ineffective, but this policy could very well be making things worse.
Oh yeah, no. The safer supply policy is obviously exacerbating the addiction crisis in Canada. And so for viewers who haven't been following, the safer supply is this idea that we give out pharmaceutical alternatives to illicit street drugs. Let's say Corey gets addicted to fentanyl because he's really stressed, running this show. You need something to take the edge off. So Corey, you're addicted to fentanyl. You buy your fentanyl off the street. It could be contaminated with xylazine, with other forms of fentanyl, like carfentanil, which is much stronger. The dosage is unpredictable. So you could easily die from buying drugs off the street. So the idea here is that we give you drugs of a known potency and of a known purity, so pharmaceutical drugs, to keep you alive until you're ready to seek treatment. Sure, that sounds great in theory. In practice, though, the drug we give, hydromorphone, it's as potent as heroin, but fentanyl is 50 times stronger. So, Corey, if you get a bottle of hydromorphone and you take it, it's not going to do anything for you. It's too weak. And so you do the rational thing that any person would do in the situation. You sell your hydromorphone at rock bottom prices because you got it for free, and you use that money to buy your drug of choice, which is fentanyl. So not only is this program not mitigating the illicit fentanyl market, it's subsidizing it. And it would actually make more sense for us just to give you cash, right? But to buy your fentanyl. But at this point, because you're selling this, you are flooding communities with hydromorphone, so essentially government heroin. And then because experienced drug users don't want it, it goes to people who are opioid naive, it goes to kids, it goes to people in recovery. The kids will take it because they don't know what it is. It's a pill at a party. They're told it's a prescription pain medication. It's safe. It's from the government. Then they get hooked. Then they graduate onto fentanyl, and it kills them. This is an absolute disaster.
And something else, Jordan, one of my commenters pointed out, which is another thing, we're getting hints of there might be some people with a vested interest in business interests in being part of the dispersal of the safer supply. I mean, that's kind of a different rabbit hole to go down, but unfortunately, some people are finding themselves with a financial interest in the status quo, which is morbid, but another thing to look into.
Well, I mean, the problem here is that clinics can make a lot of money by prescribing safer supply. You have people coming in, you have your patients coming in all the time to get their safer supply prescriptions, versus if you put them on Sublocade, for example, which is a once a month shot. The pharmacies are making an absolute killing because they dispense the safer supply every single day. So you're charging a dispensing fee every single day for every single patient. One doctor who I spoke with estimated that a single pharmacy can make $1 million a year off of 100 patients. So yeah, Shoppers Drug Mart, for example, gave about $2 million to the BC Centre for Substance Use to encourage them to create training programs for safer supply. And I think that's a huge conflict of interest. Purdue Pharma, which was the really awful company that was behind the OxyContin crisis and started this whole opiate addiction in the first place, this crisis. They produce Dilaudid, which is the brand version of hydromorphone. So they are making a lot of money off of this as well. And I'm aware of the fact that they are currently lobbying some governments about safer supply. I still need to fully investigate that. So yeah, there's a lot of pharma money involved here, which I think is really concerning.
And I guess something that has to be, you pointed out as well. I mean, full treatment, the counseling, the housing, the time, it's very expensive. You need facilities, you need trained staff, you need resources. Alberta's working along that course, but I actually have a family member who's been in and out of rehab once now, and it didn't work. It could take multiple visits, and they say, yes, you certainly are addicted. You would qualify. Come back in 30 days and we'll probably have a bed for you. But unfortunately, living on the streets for 30 days, your chances aren't looking very good at all. But I guess people have to realize with the investment in these facilities too, as expensive as they sound, we're still paying, because the person I'm speaking of was in and out of conventional hospitals chronically, in and out of shelters. Often people are in and out of jail. We're paying anyway. So we could spend those dollars better if we're trying, at least, even if there's a limited success rate in rehab. But hopefully we're starting to realize that. I mean, in BC, they've gotten rid of reality seems to be sinking in with that government.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. As you said, our capacity here is quite limited, right? So if someone has to wait 30 days to get into rehab, then that's going to make it very hard for them to get better, because you make that decision, you want to get better, but then you have to wait 30 days. Well, you're going to start using during that period. And then in 30 days, you may not want to go to rehab. It costs a lot to do all of this. As you said, we're already paying a lot. Our healthcare system is strained to the max. And part of it is because we have a small number of severely addicted people who are visiting hospitals again and again and again and again. So it would be fiscally responsible for us to put them in a treatment center instead, and could also improve healthcare access for everyone else. It just makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's a large and complicated problem. I mean, part of it too is at least letting people know so they can let their representatives know, how acute it is, and encourage them. I mean, I think most compassionate people, when they realize just how bad it's getting, would support the investment in rehab and a results-based policy. But I mean, it takes exposure. It takes letting people know. As I said, if they live in the suburbs and don't get downtown, they might not realize how bad it is until it costs them directly. So, I mean, just kind of, to wrap things up, you've been fantastic in covering this and exposing it. Where can people find your work and keep track of what you've been writing on?
Well, I'm a columnist of the National Post, so I think you should subscribe to the paper. It's great. There are also many other great writers there. And then on top of that, I run a nonprofit called the Center for Responsible Drug Policy. And we have a little Substack called Breaking Needles. So you can go find us at www.breakingneedles.com or responsibledrugpolicies.com. Either will give you access to all sorts of great material on addiction that challenges some of these, narratives of radical harm reduction that have ruined our country.
Well, that's it. I mean, just applying some common sense or looking for results. I had a doctor, Monty Ghosh, on. He specializes in addiction treatment. And you talked to, we don't have time to go into the whole thing of consumption centers. There was this horrific case of a Vancouver one I saw. It looked like an opium den of old with what it turned into. But the effectiveness of safe consumption is typically only good for about 500 yards, he said, from where the addict is. Otherwise, they're not going to travel that far. And we just don't have the resources to set one up every 500 yards in every major city. So we got to think a little harder on it.
Yeah. If we're going to spend the money, rather than spend the money on putting a safe consumption site everywhere, we should be spending money on building up treatment capacity. It's a better investment to get people better than to enable their addictions and let them slowly kill themselves.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Adam, and for the work you've been doing and exposing this. I really appreciate it. And I hope we can have you on again sometime soon to talk again.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on the show.
Right on. Thanks. So that was Adam Zivo. As he said, with the National Post, you can see the columns there, and he's prolific on a number of other sites and on X. If you're on there, all the links are available to find the groups and things that Adam's been involved with. It's just such an important and complicated issue. There's no easy answers. That's part of the problem. There's no magic bullet. Rehab alone, as I said, it's a difficult thing. People can go in and out of it. It doesn't always work, but it's the best hope we got. And just continuing to maintain, continuing to pretend and act as if these addictions are sustainable. It's not a rational way to approach it. Excuse me. We'll get back to that, though. I see out there, I was going to get a check-in from Sean Polzer, one of he writes on our business and a number of other things, speaking of prolific writers. He's out on the Stampede grounds, and I know it is roasting hot out there. I can see him drinking the water, getting ready there. So maybe we'll get to Sean there and get an update from the grounds and let him get back into somewhere cooler soon. Hey, Sean, thanks for joining us there. How's it going out there?
Oh, I'm doing all right. I'm staying hydrated, Corey. It's a scorcher down here. Oh, my God.
Oh, and that hot asphalt. and the radiating smell from the carnies. I mean, it's a difficult thing to be on the midway on a hot day.
Oh, the corn dogs. The smell of the corn dogs is over the top, my friend.
There's always that. So you just came from a presser there?
Yeah, there's a press conference a little later this afternoon with Agriculture Minister R.J. Sigurdsson. Apparently, they're going to announce some funding for cattle producers in Alberta. I'm here at the Nutrient Center, which is all things agriculture. It's been taken over by the Alberta Ag, and you'll be pleased to know that there's a display on bees and honey, Corey. They're handing out samples of honey.
Well, I've got enough of that for myself, but for others, absolutely. Beekeeping's a fun hobby.
Which is to say that we're here ostensibly to talk about business, right? The $250 million that the Stampede brings into the city. But a lot of people don't realize that it's also a major agricultural fair and a celebration of agriculture in Alberta, which is also a huge business, as you know. And cattle, especially, 80% of the cattle industry is in Alberta. We're talking, I don't know how many $1 billion at last count, but it's in the tens for sure.
Absolutely. So what else you got to update us on in the business world, John?
Well, we had the interesting story about KFC switching over all its products to halal, which seemed to kind of get an interesting response. It's being rolled out in Ontario, but they have plans to spread it out to the rest of the country here by the end of the year. And keeping with the agricultural theme, that entails a whole reworking of the supply chain for chicken and those various meat products that they use. So
yeah, it's bizarre on, I guess, well, I don't know. It's a business decision on their part, but I don't know if it's really been well received by everybody in general when they hear about it.
Well, apparently it is quite common, and I didn't know this, but some other chains, like for instance, Popeyes is supposed to be halal already. I don't know if it's certified. Normally they put the little certified mark. If you go to the UK, UK is one of the few countries in Europe where people do eat a lot of fried chicken, but they do tend to be Muslim. So I don't know. It sounds like it's coming over here. Another interesting story. We've got this anti-woke activist, Robbie Starbuck, down in the States. He's already taken down Tractor Supply, and now he's going after John Deere for their DEI policies and what is it, the HRS scores or whatever it is that they do. So in case you missed the story last week, Tractor Supply was forced to back down on green energy, diversity, inclusion, hiring, all those various initiatives. They get a CEI score, which is inclusion for LGBTQ people. And John Deere scored 95 out of 100. If you didn't know, John Deere is one of the oldest publicly traded corporations in the United States. It was founded in about 1837, so the company itself is actually older than Canada. And it is among the largest manufacturers of agricultural equipment around the world. They're in South America, they're in India, they're all over.
Yeah, well, I found it interesting because I think the only thing dumber than going woke for Budweiser is going woke for people who use tractors. Because if you want the least support for DEI and woke garbage and gender pronouns in your emails, it's probably agricultural producers who are buying those tractors.
Well, all I have to do is look around here, Corey.
Wow, crazy times, but it's good to see a pushback at least. I mean, I think for most consumers, it just give me my product. I don't care about all the other stuff. Just sell me a decent product.
Sure. Another interesting story that I followed earlier this week was Alberta government's announcement with Shell and ATCO to license the pore space for carbon sequestration. So for those who are familiar with the oil patch, oil companies lease the subsurface rights to pull the minerals out of the ground. And in this case, what they're doing is they're leasing the subsurface to take the captured emitted gases from the Scotford refinery and put them underground. So it's kind of a major shift. And whether or not you agree with carbon capture or not, the jury is still out on how expensive it is or what the business case is. But, if Shell seems committed to spend $15 billion on it. And Alberta government is talking about a $45 billion industry by 2030. There's supposed to be about 24 more of these projects lined up in the queue. We're talking some pretty substantial investments and some pretty good scale, something like 50,000 jobs. So I don't know, those sound like pretty good numbers to me.
Yeah, well, time will tell if it's effective. I mean, we're a producer, but we got to keep flexing because we're just embattled on every direction for what we produce.
Well, and the comment was made is that customers are demanding this. So it'd be like if you're going to McDonald's and, you know, people are getting tired of your watered down Coke and your greasy hamburgers. Maybe you got to come up with something new to try and keep that business, right?
Could be. All right. Well, is that all you got for us today there, Sean?
Off the top of my head, unless you just want to talk some numbers here down at the Stampede, I'm not sure how many people here, but they're breaking attendance records like crazy. I think there was 150,000 the other day. Today's Kids Day, so the Midway is absolutely packed. This is one of the few quiet places that I could find, and also one of the few shady places that I could find to actually come to. So,
all right. Well, I appreciate the check-in, and I'll let you get back to the ag world and get that corn dog into you so that smell doesn't tempt you much longer. So, thanks, Sean, and we'll see you in a while.
Thanks a lot.
Hey. So that was an update from Sean Polzer, and yes, he writes on a lot of our business and energy issues, which are very important, I mean, in the West and in Alberta in general. So, in the Stampede, it is a big, people forget that if you go to the ag corner of it, sometimes people skip that section. They just go to the Midway or they go to the rodeo or the grandstand show. But no, it's still an old school fair. There's still cows and sheep and you know, livestock up for competition and things like that. There's a lot more to it if you get down there and have a look around. So, it's pretty hot weather, but there's still time if you're in Calgary to get down there and have a look. Oh, you know, I want to get back a bit to some of that talk now about addiction, because I just, as I said, I got a personal connection going on right now with this, and it's problematic and difficult. And it's so rooted, and there's so many problems. There's so many facets. As I was saying, there's no magic bullet. There's no one solution. One of the things that really started it, and I got to see it firsthand, though, what really took it off, you know, they called it hillbilly heroin. It was the OxyContin that was going around. Years ago, I used to survey a lot in the States on oil and gas exploration projects. I was working down about 10 years ago, maybe, in West Virginia. Yeah, it is a special part of the world, and it's earned its reputation. But I'd messed up with the chainsaw and got a big thorn driven into my forearm. Very uncomfortable, and it went in deep, and I couldn't get it out, and you could feel it under there. It was a great big thing. So I went to a clinic in West Virginia. What was the name of that town? Weirton? I'm not sure now. It was just a little one on the Ohio River across from Steubenville. And I see this doctor, and I'm waiting, and I get in, and the first thing, this doctor finally comes into the room and looks at it and says, "What's your pain level on 1 to 10? It's not bad. You know, I don't know, 3 or 4. I just want this thing out of here." And he looks at it, and this is, I can't do anything with that. You got to go to see a orthopedic surgeon. I don't have time for it. And then before he leaves the room, he says, "What's your pain level on 1 to 10 again?" I said, "It's like 2 or 3. I'm fine." So he just hustled out of the room, said he couldn't do anything about it, and I left. As I was filling out the insurance forms, because I was in the States, in the front, I kind of finally realized what this clinic was about. Because while I was in the waiting room, people were coming and going constantly, just in and out, quick visits. The guy was a pill pusher. He had his, you know, he was a medical practitioner. He had no interest in actually practicing medicine. He was making his money. These people were all coming in and getting their oxy prescription slips, and he could quickly charge for that. And because the people coming and going, you can see they weren't sick, they weren't injured, though they were, you know, again, looking like your usual troubled addicts. And this was the crap that was going on in the States. This was where they were pushing this opioid-based pills. And I mean, that's all he kept asking me. If I'd have said my pain level was 8, I'm sure he would have given me a prescription for Oxy or something of the sort quickly enough, Vicodin, God knows what, and help create more addicts. That started to give the base of this North American addiction epidemic, really. And as Adam was talking about, when you're an addict, it's always increasing. You don't get enough of your buzz, and it gets more expensive. And now, part of the problem is people realize that, you know, and Pfizer and some companies got sued. They got hit hard because of how they were pushing this as a non-addictive substance for the problem. But the addicts didn't go away. And now they couldn't, you know, the doctor pill pushers are still out there, but they're not as quick, as many as there used to be. So what do? They turn to the streets, of course. And what do you got? You got fentanyl. Now, fentanyl, as Adam said, I mean, this is a freight train, way more powerful than heroin, cheap, plentiful, easy to find, and of course, terrifically dangerous. Very addictive, and it just keeps spreading. It just keeps spreading. And it's funny, we joked about, my taking fentanyl to ease the stresses of this, but I did, they gave me a fentanyl and something else mixed when I had I'll say it, a colonoscopy a while back. And I tell you what, I mean, under medical supervision, it's a very, very effective drug and, in proper application. I mean, boy, that zonked me out. I mean, considering what they had to go up there and do and take care of and me not remembering a bit of it, that's really effective. But I mean, if you start self-applying something that potent and that powerful, you're into a catastrophic problem. And, paradoxically saying, BC suing Pfizer for pill mills. And you see, these are things, and at the same time, buy safe supply from Pfizer. We got this closed loop of selling these drugs. It's not going to come easily, the solution to this nightmare, this problem. But for people unfamiliar with addiction is bloody tough. You've got to remember, I mean, you see people saying, oh, just buck up and stop. Look, guys, it's not like that. It's not. You have to reprogram your brain. You have to change things. Addiction is by its very nature irrational. It controls the person. It took me many, many false starts to stop drinking. And I still will crave a drink now and then. You've always got to be on guard. And that's just liquor. I didn't deal with something like fentanyl or meth or some of the other stuff going on out there. It takes a long period of time. It takes a lot of therapy, a lot of work, a lot of help and stability. There's one of the areas where, I mean, again, you see the activists kind of get it and they kind of don't, where they talk about the housing first strategy. We've got to get the addicts housed before we can treat them. So we need more houses, more houses, more houses. Well, not exactly. You're half right. I mean, you can't treat an addict if they're living behind a dumpster or if they're in a tent in a city park. It's very difficult, while they wait to get into a treatment center. Their chances of defeating the addiction when they're living in those circumstances are very slim. But when you're talking about long-term housing, because that's what these activists talk about, no, they aren't ready for that either. I mean, if you stick a fentanyl addict in an apartment, they're going to rip the copper wires out of the walls and sell them to get their next fix. They aren't in position for that yet either. We need treatment centers and we need access and we need it fast. That's the thing. When an addict has hit that point, when they've hit that part in their life where they say, God, I've got to change this. I've got to get out of this. Somebody help me. Please help me. And then they say, yeah, just hang on 30 days. It's not going to work. Very few of them will make it that long. But if the facility is there, if you can get them in, you've got a chance. You got a chance. And a much bigger chance. After treatment, I believe it depends on which ones. You're looking at some after, say, a 90-day program. Yeah, that's how long it takes to really do it. And you're looking at like 45% stay off it for good. And people say, well, it's, you got 55% aren't. True, but if they're on the streets, their chances of getting off it are darn near zero. And they're probably going to die. And as well, is not without cost. Like some people say, well, I mean, I've seen some pretty cold statements. Well, that's the way it goes, Darwinism. Well, no, actually, they're all sons, daughters, cousins, fathers, sisters. They have loved ones. They were people who, came out and got into the wrong rut. And we want to, compassionate conservatism means saving them. And if you want to be a fiscal conservative, it still means treating them. As we said, you got, they're costing anyways. It's very expensive to have an addict in jail. It's very expensive to have an addict in a regular hospital, as well as the shelter system and many other areas. They're still costing. So if we're going to spend all the money, let's try to get them into the places where we can treat them and get them off of that. Even if it's only half of them succeed, it's a heck of a lot better than the success rate if they aren't. And it's huge and it's growing. Ian Leslie saying, I'm surprised you haven't looked into the roots of fentanyl sources. I have, but that's a whole separate show. We can only cover so much. That's what I mean. It's complicated. I mean, reducing the supply and where it's coming from and who's benefiting from it and who's profiting from it, that's another facet of the whole thing as well. Absolutely. But the more immediate and pressing thing are the current addicts, the people you see, the ones on the streets. And there's a lot that you don't see. They haven't hit the streets yet. They're still at home. They're still somewhat functioning with their jobs. But an addiction is a progressive disorder. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. And they're going to end up either dead or on the streets if they don't get treated. So we need rational discussions. We need outcome-based discussions. We need to quit talking about, as Adam said, just feeding it along and pretending we can maintain the addiction for people, and people can maintain a life while still taking that stuff, as long as they get good drugs. There's no good meth. There's no good fentanyl outside of a clinical environment under the supervision of an actual medical professional for a procedure, not for maintaining an addiction. Let's have those discussions. We're paying that price. We're losing people. And it's time that we stop listening to the loony activists, and they are nuts, and start looking at what might actually work. And these guys need help. These gals need help. But we need to help them the right way, not just give them more bloody drugs. Stupid. God. If they gave out shooters in my AA meetings, I never would have made it. All right, that's it for today, guys. Let's check it out again, westernstandard.news/subscription. Take out a subscription. Share the links, guys. Get it out there. Let's beat legacy media and have good media sources out there. I appreciate you all tuning in today. Tune in a little later. We're going to have the pipeline. We'll break down a lot more issues. I had a good discussion with Minister Todd Lowen a little while ago. There's going to be a video going out about that with the ability to hunt problem grizzly bears in Alberta. It's a bit of an interesting issue going on out here. So thank you all for tuning in. Come back again next week. I promise I won't insult your eyes with more Western wear. We'll be back to normal, and we'll cover a whole bunch more new issues then. So thanks again. We'll see you then.